Hi guys, welcome back, lecture 3, and we left off with the association areas found in the cerebral cortex. And the association areas are those cortical regions around the major, so for instance, you have a primary auditory cortex, that's where the information is brought into the cerebrum, and specifically from those sensory nerves that come up through the midbrain, and uh, and then the areas around there are called the association areas, right? So in the parietal lobe, where those language centers are, you have these association areas that allow you to understand speech. In the frontal lobe, you have association areas that allow you to make complex decision making. So um, these things seem to be relatively straightforward if you know where those primary regions are. Remember, the primary motor cortex is right in front of the central gyrus, and sensory is right behind it. Um, Important ones to be familiar with are Broca's area, Wernicke's area. Remember, Broca's area is up front there. It's in the frontal cortex, and that's where the ability to speak, that's where your words are. That's where the ability to use language is, but not the meaning, right? So well, if you recollect, Wernicke's is in the parietal temporal region, and so that's where the associations are for sensory information and hearing, and uh, and so that's where the meaning of words are kept. Just above Broca's area is the frontal eye field, so this is where those neurons associated with allowing you to move your eyes around. Remember that the central commissure, or the sagittal commissure, that's the thing that divides the two uh, lobes of the cerebrum from one another, makes up or delineates the two hemispheres. And there's sort of some common axioms about the type of processing that happens in these two different hemispheres. So we say that the left hemisphere is dominant in most individuals, and it's where these concrete skills like speech, writing, reading, verbal skills, analytical skills, math skills are, right? Computational skills. On the other side, in the right hemisphere, we have the non-dominant tasks that are kind of thought of as like more global, holistic, creative. In fact, there's always been sort of this antagonistic view of the two sides of the brain is if you're right-brained, you're this creative artist, and if you're a left-brained person, you're a scientist, which isn't really completely true, but it's a nice way to think about the lateralization of function is what we say. So different sides have different roles. And that's it, right brain, left brain. Over here on the right, you see this really cool structure called the hippocampus, right? This hippocampus means seahorse. Hippo means horse. Campus means sea. So there's the hippocampus. And the hippocampus is associated with long-term memory formation. Your memory has two potential places for it to be processed. The frontal lobes are associated with what's called working memory. And in those frontal lobe association areas, I can sort of like remember somebody's phone number. In fact, you can watch somebody who's trying to memorize things, and you'll see them look up and to the right or up and to the left. Criminal or detectives use this when they're trying to tell whether somebody's lying to them or not, or whether they're making things up in their head. And so you have the short-term memory circuit in the frontal lobe, and it's a limited system. Now, long-term memory formation is a horse of another color, and this is processed in the hippocampus, which is just deep to the temporal lobe, and the hippocampus is really important in taking short-term memory and turning it into long-term memory. Damage to this causes a bizarre condition called anterograde amnesia. And so these are the people that have a 3-minute memory, just like Witty Ticky Ray, the book that we read. Beneath the cerebral cortex is the basal ganglia. And so these are a bunch of different structures. They include things like the fornix or the amygdala, the hippocampus, They all coordinate in fine-tuning the activity of the brain that allows you to give complex responses, right? So this is where your ability to catch a baseball uh, and respond to a object thrown at you. All right, so we're moving out of these higher cerebral functions, right? The parts that make you uniquely human, into those deeper things that make you just like all of your animal brothers and sisters. All right, so we have the basal ganglia. It's made up of these different structures, and uh, and it's also important in learning. Okay, so the hippocampus, in addition to obviously storing formation memory, is also associated with learning. Right? What's the difference between learning and memory? It's very little. Remember, I also said earlier in the year, what's the difference between pleasure and learning? Also, not much difference. So we see these dopaminergic pathways down in the basal ganglia, and just beneath the basal ganglia, we have the diencephalon. So the diencephalon is made up of the epithalamus and the thalamus and the hypothalamus, and these guys connect the limbic system to the brain. All right. So this is a gateway for sensory information that's heading up into the cerebral cortex. It's getting all the sensory information and it processes it and sends it to the right places. All right. So the thalamus is at the top, tip of the top. Beneath the thalamus is a structure called the hypothalamus. And this is where some important autonomic regulatory nuclei are found. So the hypothalamus is the master, or it's associated with the pituitary gland, and it's regulating blood. It's got a measured blood oxygen levels. And so it regulates hormonal secretions. So it's associated with the pituitary gland, helps inform that pituitary gland with its sensory inputs. Part of these associated regions of the deep, or the tissues just beneath the cerebral cortex, are called the limbic system. All right, so it includes portions of the cerebral lobes, but it also includes these deeper structures, and they all organize into this system that's sometimes been called the reptilian brain. All right, so this is the thing that drives you to reproduce. This is where you fall in love. This is where you get hungry. This is where you kill. Okay, the reptilian brain, the limbic system, are these the deepest parts of your motivation as an individual, and they include, again, some of these structures associated with the diencephalon as well as the basal ganglia. Right, so limbic system, reptilian brain. This is where you hunt. This is where you kill. This is where you fall in love and mate. Beneath the diencephalon is the midbrain, or mesencephalon, and the pons and medulla oblongata. Right, so we have the thalamus up top here that's taking information up into the cerebral cortex, and as we go lower, deeper down into the brain, we see these other deeper structures with, frankly, more fundamental roles. Let's just go to the pons. In your pons, the pons is this sort of a bulging protrusion in the midbrain, and it's where you find your breathing centers. Same sort of thing happens in the medulla oblongata. That's that big, long extension beneath the pons. So this is where all these central autonomic functions, your heart rate, your breathing, and the regulation of the muscles that control blood pressure in your veins. Of course, one of the problems with somebody that's maybe been in a car accident is this. Remember that this is right where, so here's pons, here's medulla, and this is this beginning of the spinal cord. And what delineates that is the foramen magnum. So this is where the spinal cord leaves the cranial cavity, right? So this is that big hole. Now, somebody who's been in a car accident often has their head snapped forward, and when they do that, this spinal region of the spinal cord, the medulla, can actually get pulled through the medulla or through the foramen magnum and squished, and you are dead instantly. So I guess in all ways you're going to go out. That's not a terrible way to do it. But that's the problem with whiplash. It's damage to the medulla oblongata, and then you just stop breathing. Your heart stops. Another deep structure that has connections to the deep parts of the brain and to the cerebral cortex is the reticular formation. And so the reticular formation has all these different radiations out to the cerebral cortex, but it's also sort of really importantly located down in those the regions of the pons and the medulla. And this is what keeps you awake or puts you to sleep. So damage to the reticular formation can give you insomnia or conditions that promote insomnia, and being awake and being asleep are sort of the two things you are, right? You're either awake or you're asleep. Those are the big differences in your nerve functions during the day. Sleep is fascinating. I think the number's like 70% of Americans have some sort of sleep disturbances. And the study of sleep and your sleep hygiene is really important to you. A lot of you guys are going to suffer from insomnia because you're looking at your phones at 11 o'clock at night. And of course, the light from those phones stimulates those deep reticular formations. That's right. The optic nerve, the first nerve, feeds into your brain, and if it sees light, it tells you to wake up. And you guys know that. When the sun rises, lots of times, you guys, if you're in a good place, that will wake you up, right? Sunrise. So light is an important input to the reticular formation and dictates how much sleep there is. And so, of course, any good sleep doc will tell you that you need to get away from electronic screens for at least a couple hours before you're ready to go to bed. Nobody does that. There's a bunch of different phases of sleep, but one of the important or interesting ones is called REM sleep. And you can see this little lady down at the bottom. She's wiggling her eyes around. It's REM stands for rapid eye movement. And this is a paradoxical form of sleep. It doesn't dominate your sleep patterns. There's alpha sleep and beta sleep and all kinds of different other patterns. But in REM, the thinking was, and I'm not so sure that it's standing up to scrutiny of time, is that this is when you're dreaming. Okay. At the back of the brain, you have the cerebellum, and remember I asked you guys about densely packed neurons, and there's some really big neurons back here called the Purkinje cells, and then there's these really tiny cells called the I don't remember, but anyway, the cerebellum is this region of your brain that's associated with pattern repetitive behavior. Okay, it takes in sensory information and coordinates skeletal muscle activity. So if you've ever been driving for 40 minutes and realize you haven't really been paying attention, that's because your cerebellum and the reticular formation have been helping take care of those complex behaviors. So once again, I got the cerebrum, the basal ganglia, diencephalon, brainstem, and the cerebellum are the major portions of the brain.